Hey class, this is Dr. Duncan here. I wanted to take a few moments to touch bases with you and have an opportunity for you to see who's behind all of the assignments and the grading. So as you can see, it is the summer. So in the summer, I am not in my office on a regular basis. I do work from home a lot, but I am right here at the computer. So with that being said, please know if you need to get in contact with me, the best way is email. If you call and leave me a message at the office, I may not get it till a week or two from now. I typically do try to stop into my office at least once or twice a week throughout the summer, but there's no guarantee that I will definitely stop in once or twice a week. So definitely shoot me an email. In addition, I also try to use different avenues and different social media outlets to engage you, and so we can stay in connection with one another. And one is Periscope. So I am on Periscope. If you have Periscope, you can download Periscope on your phone, and it's just the app. And my name on Periscope is Duncan CJC. That's Duncan, D-U-N-C-J-C, Duncan Criminal Justice. And let me show you what the little icon looks like for Periscope. And with Periscope, what I generally use Periscope for, if you can see that right there, that's the Periscope app. What I generally use Periscope for is the opportunity for us to connect outside of business hours. So I usually come on and do a live chat 8, 9 o'clock because I understand that a number of you work, and sometimes if we're emailing, we're trying to correspond via telephone, we're missing each other because you're at work and then I'm responding, so we're playing that like cat and mouse game. So what I use Periscope for is an opportunity for us to log on and live chat. I may do a little mini lecture. If something is going on live, I may record it. Which happened to me this past weekend when I got pulled over, but I didn't record that. But that's a different story. So I just want to let you know, ways to contact me. Definitely email, also on Periscope, and I will also set up our Blackboard chat. So if we need real-time discussion, please do not hesitate to contact me at all. I am here for you. So I want to spend a few moments going over our assignments. So you would notice I got a couple emails. This week, you wrapped up Module 1.1 was May 23rd to 27th. This week we're now on May 30th to June 6th, and you have 2.1, 3, and 3.1 that we're going to talk about inside these modules. Make sure you understand that each assignment is due by 8 a.m. 8 a.m. on that closing date. So June 6th for modules 2.1 and 3.1, you need to have those assignments completed. Your discussion board. When you do have a discussion board, remember your discussion board, your initial post is due by Thursday. That's to allow everyone the opportunity to respond. If everyone waits until Saturday to post their initial, some won't have an opportunity to respond. So make sure that you have your initial discussion board posted by Thursday. And then you have to have your reply and everything by that close date by 8 a.m. So going through, you notice there's not a book in this class, which I told you in the introduction video. If you have not had an opportunity under the announcement page to view that first video, make sure you view that first introduction video where I just go over expectations, go over the fact that no, there's not a book assigned to this class and whatnot. Moving on, so what are we talking about? What is Intro to Criminal Justice about? Intro to Criminal Justice is just that. It's just us touching on all of the different subjects of criminal justice. When we say criminal justice, what is criminal justice comprised of? We often hear our criminal justice system, but what does that entail? So I'd like to take the opportunity to explain some of that to you. When you think of criminal justice, some of you may have had an opportunity to be in the system or may know someone through the system. There's three components that comprise our criminal justice system. So if you do something and you commit a crime, the first person or the first chain or the first entity you're going to come in encounter with is law enforcement. So law enforcement is that first. Once you come in contact with law enforcement, you're going to then probably more likely have to go through our court system, right? So that's the second compartment, is our court system. And then finally, if you don't want this one, but then the last is the correction. So the three systems or the three entities that make up our criminal justice system, we're saying criminal justice, you have courts, corrections, so you have that, courts, corrections, and law enforcement. Courts, corrections, and law enforcement. Or if you do it in order, you can say law enforcement, courts, corrections. Corrections is just that, the incarceration, or if you get in probation or whatever that is. So make sure you understand what that entails when we say the criminal justice system. Moving on from the criminal justice system, just in an overly broad sense, we start looking at and defining, in this topic, you're going to define crimes and different types of crimes, which a lot of people do not understand the difference between, for example, a robbery and a burglary. What is a robbery and what is a burglary? So understanding that a robbery is an act of breaking into a certain structure. An act of breaking into a structure, burglary is an act of breaking into a certain structure, such as a home, without permission. That's a burglary. A robbery, when you rob someone, is totally different. So we often say people rob my house. Well, you can't really rob a house. So making sure you understand the difference between robbery and burglary. Those are the two that we get confused with. We're going to talk about larceny. What is larceny? Murder, terrorism, battery, and assault. Being able to identify those differences. Sorry, my cell phone is ringing. And let me tell you, when I'm lecturing and I'm doing lectures for class, I do not go back and make this perfect lecture with no corrections and everything's grammatically correct, because that's not how it is if we were in class. If you were in my classroom, if we were having lecture, I'll make a mistake and we have to proceed from there. So sometimes in my videos, a cell phone may ring. I may have to answer the phone, something. But I try to limit the distraction. But just so you know, I do not go back and edit, so you will get some blurred moments. All right, so going on, we have the three main components of our criminal justice. We have some of the main different types of crimes, and you're going to be able to identify the difference between burglary and robbery. Sorry, between burglary and robbery. Oh. Within law enforcement, when we go back to our three components of criminal justice, within law enforcement, and really with you have three levels of law enforcement. That's federal, state, and local. Your federal, state, and local are your three levels of law enforcement. So let's take a look about what that looks like. So a local entity of law enforcement would be just that. If you live in Fayetteville, your Fayetteville Police, Spring Lake, your Spring Lake Police. Those are your local municipalities. That's your local policing agency. We move on to state, and we define what is a state example. So what's an example of state law enforcement? State would be your highway patrol. North Carolina Highway Patrol is an example of your state. You have your North Carolina, SBI, State Bureau of Investigation. That's a state. Then federal, my little caveat on how I describe federal, any of those fine three letters that we have. You have the FBI, the CIA, all of those, ATF. Those are federal law enforcement agencies. And what that defines is the different jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means the area in which they can preside over and which they have enforcement over. So you can conceivably commit one crime and actually violate a state statute and a federal statute. And yes, you can be charged and sentenced in state and federal court. So it's clear to understand that we have three levels of law enforcement, and you can commit one crime that violates both. And no, that is not double jeopardy. If you don't know what double jeopardy is yet, we're going to hit on that later. But understanding the three levels of law enforcement in that. So, try to slow it down. We have the three levels of law enforcement. Now we're going to go over to our court system. So we have our law enforcement, or our policing agencies, right? Now we're going to go over and talk about our court system. Our court system consists of two levels, federal court and state court. Because again, remember, you can commit one crime that violates both. So if you commit a federal crime, you're not going to be in state court. You're going to federal court. The easiest way, especially in Fayetteville, that I like to use as an example is Fort Bragg. Any crime you commit on Fort Bragg, whether it's speeding, a simple assault, any crime you commit on Fort Bragg is a federal offense, because that's federal jurisdiction. So understanding, whether you're in the military, not in the military, related to the, affiliated to the military, if you're in that jurisdiction, you have committed a federal offense. Ignorance is not an excuse of the law. Actually, if you look Fort Bragg going up, I don't know how many of you are actually in Fayetteville or the Fort Bragg area, but going up that highway through Spring Lake, that 87, that 210, that's actually still Fort Bragg's jurisdiction. So if you get pulled over and you're issued a citation there, that's a federal offense. You're going to federal court. So the state, we have dual court system. We have the federal and the state. You're going to have your trial court, your appellate court, and then the court of last resort is on federal, but you have your state Supreme Court as well. So in North Carolina, if we look at how this, if you commit a crime in the state, you're going to have that trial. Then maybe something goes wrong, you appeal. You don't have that, then you appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court. You have that same right and that same avenue you're going to travel to on the federal court. The court of last resort is referred to as the United States Supreme Court. So remember that. Court of last resort is the United States Supreme Court. So we've hit on the law enforcement, how it has 3 entities. We hit on the court system, how it has 2, it's a dual system. Now we're going to go back and talk about the 5 stages in our criminal justice system. 5 stages, meaning what happens once you enter into that criminal justice system. So the first thing is entry into the system. What must occur for you to enter into our criminal justice system? You have committed and violated some type of crime, some type of statute. Once you're entered, then you're going to have prosecution and pretrial services. Pretrial, we're going to go all the way into that. But pretrial is just that, different activities and different things that transpire prior to a trial occurring. Then you're going to go through the adjudication process. And then sentencing and sanctions. So what is the sentence going to be? What is essentially the punishment? You may get sentenced to corrections. You may get probation. You may get parole. Those are all different avenues of corrections and sentencing and sanctions. Once you've been sentenced and sanctioned, the 5th and final step into the criminal justice process is corrections. So you may actually be institutionalized. It's not always saying that you will be institutionalized, but there is a potential that you will be institutionalized. With all of our law enforcement agencies, with all of our court personnel, with all of our correctional personnel, they have one thing in common, and that's the ability to make a decision for individuals based on personal judgment rather than formal rules. So they have the ability to make their own personal decision. It's not saying that this will have to happen, and that's what's called discretion. Understanding that sometimes, and this is where it gets kind of convoluted, because sometimes discretion breeds corruption. Discretion could possibly breed corruption, but that's not always the case. But the reason why that is because if you have discretion, it's saying if a police officer pulls you over, they have a personal judgment to decide 3 things that they can do to you. They can give you a verbal warning, a written warning, or they can write out a citation. And there's nothing defining saying if you do this, then they must do this. They all have what's called discretion to actually carry that out. So understanding that, and then you can kind of see the propensity of how corruption may evolve from that, because if you're using your discretion and it's actually discriminatory, well, we have an issue, we have a problem. All right, moving right along, trying to hit on a couple things for this module so you can be ready for the second. We have 2 different modules or 2 different modes of our criminal justice system if you think about it, and this is where your discussion board actually comes in this week. I know the discussion board in this chapter, in this module, is very challenging in 2.1, and reading that, I will come back on later and explain the purpose behind it, but make sure you are here. If you are, by your last name, you are arguing that our drinking and driving laws are too stringent. If not, then you're not. And the reason why I'm having you do that is we're highlighting 2 things. We have 2 different ways our criminal justice system operates. One is the due process model of criminal justice. Due process focuses on individual rights. Due process is saying that we have these rights guaranteed to us by the United States Constitution. I do not want these infringed upon by any reason. The crime control model is the model that emphasizes social order. So the example I like to use with this is, okay, so after 9/11, right? 9/11, we passed a bill entitled the Patriot Act. We passed a bill, I don't know if any of you watched that or remember, that bill was passed in a wee night of the hours. We woke up and we had the Patriot Act, right? What all is encompassed in that Patriot Act? There's a lot, and there's a lot of discussion about that, saying it's actually the only piece of legislation that takes laws away from us. So in the Patriot Act, if there is a clause in there that says that on your cell phone, certain words, certain phrases, reiterating certain things can trigger an automatic tap for the FBI to actually listen into your conversation as a precautionary technique, and we're talking specifically terrorism. Remember, everything with the Patriot Act was to prevent terrorism, although it's the #1 law that's used to actually get drug convictions. But the Patriot Act, so a crime control individual would say, look, I'm not talking about anything. I mean, I don't care if you think that I'm doing terrorism. If I know I'm not doing it, I don't mind you tapping on my phone. Due process said, no, under the United States Constitution, I'm guaranteed from unreasonable search and seizure. Under no reason should you be listening to my phone. I don't care what you think or may have. If you don't have probable cause, you can't go forth with that. So those are the two different things. Due process, crime control. Due process is individual rights. I'm entitled to these rights. Crime control is emphasis on social order. So crime control individuals say, I don't have a problem with giving up a little bit of my rights for the good of the whole. Prime example is when you travel. If you choose to travel on the airline, you forfeit your right. What right do you forfeit? That's what I want you to look up. What right do you forfeit when you choose to travel on the airline? Because understand, for a police officer or anyone to actually carry out a search, they have to have what? Those are the two things I want you to know. What right and what must a police officer have to carry out a search? Well, when you choose to fly, you forfeit all of that, right? You're going to the screening. You're saying, go through my stuff. If they find anything, bam. So, recap of what we talked about. We talked about what comprises our criminal justice system. We have 3 entities. Within those 3 entities, we broke down that law enforcement has 3 levels. Law enforcement has 3. The court has 2. We've talked about the entry into our criminal justice system. The model or the idea or the emphasis that we have 2 things, individual right and social order. On that. Moving on, going back into entry, we're still going about the courts. And we're going to talk about now is when you enter in our overall criminal justice system, now we're going to talk about the order. So we already said the first thing is entry, the 5 stages of the criminal justice process: entry, prosecution, adjudication, sentence, and corrections. Well, now let's look at the criminal justice, the order what that would actually happen. So let's say Kim is out in the middle of the street and Kim is involved in, I don't know, assault and battery. First thing that's going to happen for her to get entered, she's going to be arrested. Arrested is when you're actually detained, your freedom is actually taken away from you. Booking. What occurs at booking? They're going to get all your information, your fingerprints, they're going to take your picture. Your information on your indictment, you're going to find out the charges that's coming against you. Then you're going to have your arraignment. That's when you're going to be able to enter in whether you're innocent, but your plea basically. What are you going to say? You have 3 things you can say. You can say, I'm guilty, I'm not guilty, or no contest. No contest is saying, like, I'm not saying anyway. If you have enough to get me, you have enough to get me. After your arraignment, you will have your trial. That's actually going through to see if you're going to be found guilty or not. Then the verdict is going to come from your trial. A lot of people get confused on this. Make sure your trial and then your verdict. Your verdict is now coming from the jury or the judge. You have 2 options when you're doing a trial. You have what's called a bench trial or a jury trial. Bench trial or a jury trial. Once that trial is completed, that's when you're going to get the verdict. The verdict is going to say whether you're guilty or not. After that, it's going to be sentencing, then corrections. So, if you have questions or any of that I've put out so far, remember, shoot me an email if you need me to explain anything in further detail. This is just hitting on talking about criminal justice and getting into that. At your arraignment, understanding that a couple things are going to happen at your arraignment. You're going to identify who you are, that's the person. You're going to be informed of your charges and the rise of your rights. So, you're going to be identified, informed of the charges and the rise of your rights, and that's when you will enter your plea. Your rights are, for example, according to which amendment, we all have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one will be appointed to you. That's what's called a public defender. Now, this is not to say you have what's called a private attorney and a public defender. A public defender is paid by the state. They're very overworked and they're underpaid. My experience, I've actually worked in the public defender's office and in the state's attorney's office. So my background comes more, I've never been on the beat for law enforcement. My background and where I've worked in the courts and I've worked in DC on Capitol Hill as far as drafting laws. But that's a whole other topic when we get all the way into the criminal law. So, 2.1, we went over a little mini lecture about what to entail for criminal justice and what that is. You also have your crime myth quiz. Make sure under your reading assignment, that's where you will find your crime myth assignments. And it's basically just that. What are some of the myths you have about crime? Has crime declined or inclined over the years? What is deviant and criminal? Is deviance and criminal behavior the same thing? If someone is deviant, are they automatically a criminal? If somebody is a criminal, are they automatically deviant? And that's what we're going to talk about, the difference with deviance and criminal activity, which is no. Because you can be deviant and definitely not criminal. Deviant is something that goes against the norm, but it's not necessarily a criminal act. For example, if somebody was to wear their Ku Klux Klan attire, if they're wearing their Black Panthers attire, if they're there's nothing. You have the freedom of speech and expression. There's nothing wrong with them just wearing that. But it would be, it's deviant. It goes against what we actually that phone is going off. Is doing. Moving on, when we start talking about 3.1 and what you're looking at 3.1, you're starting to look more at outlining the difference. We're going to talk about the difference between civil and criminal law. Civil and criminal law. And the main difference between civil and criminal law, one is the burden of proof. The burden of proof means what must be met in that case. So in a criminal law, in a criminal case, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you are on trial for something or you've been convicted of something, it is the prosecution's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed that crime. As a defense attorney, I am just simply trying to place doubt in your mind. When you commit a crime, North Carolina state statute will have a crime that has the elements. The elements means this must have happened for this to occur. When you go to trial, as a defense, I'm simply trying to place doubt. Civil case is preponderance of evidence. So the burden of proof is less in a civil case. The classic case with that is O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was found guilty and what? And innocent in what? I'm going to leave that up for you to look, but you find and see which court he was found innocent in and which one he was found guilty in. And again, that's because of the burden of proof and what must be met. So in a civil court case, you're not looking at crime. The legal responsibility, or in the civil court, is the legal responsibility for one's own actions. You're looking at liability in the civil court case. So you're not saying that this person committed an illegal statute, but you're saying that this person is liable, saying that they did this, they caused these actions. The civil court, the defendant is the person or the institution against whom the action is brought against. So if Tina slips in my house and then she breaks her leg, she wants to sue me because she's saying I'm liable for her fall. She wants to sue me for her medical bills. We're going to take that in civil court. That has nothing to do with criminal. That's a civil case. And I would be the defendant. Tina would be the plaintiff, the person that's initiating that lawsuit in a civil case. And looking at that, and remember, a civil case, the burden of proof is preponderance of evidence. Criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to talk about male and C and male prohibitor crimes. Male and C and male prohibitor crimes. Make sure you look at that and be able to not only explain male and C and male prohibitor crimes, but give me an example of male and C and male prohibitor crimes. So this was a little longer lecture than I usually do, but I wanted to give you some important information to kind of chew on as you're going into this module. And again, throughout the semester, I will come on and do just video lectures, and we also will have an opportunity we can converse back and forth. So again, I am on Periscope. Follow me on Periscope. I'll get an alert. How Periscope works is once I'm on Periscope, you will get an automatic Dr. Duncan is live. Right when I come on Periscope, that means I'm live. If you have a question about something, if you're not understanding something, if you say, oh, I think you graded this incorrectly, whatever it may be, you have that opportunity to talk to me right there instantaneously. So I hope you guys had a great weekend. You're ready to knock out these next two modules. Remember, this module is open until June. What is it? June 6th. I've closed it out. Started talking back to you. June 6th, 2.1. 3.1, 2.1 and 3.1, and we're going to start talking about crime statistics, how we evaluate crime. Next module, we're moving on to criminology. Criminology looks at why people engage in criminal behavior. So again, in each of these modules, we're just really much hitting on it. And if you're majoring in criminal justice, then that's when you go forth and take that full class. We have a criminal law class, we have a criminology class, a civil procedures class. But in this intro class, we're just touching, I'm giving you just a little bit of the basics of each of it. So feel free to shoot me an email or check me out on Periscope if you have any questions. I'll talk to you soon.